morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where today is a bit of a light news day, although I suspect tomorrow might be very big because as I always check Fandango to see when movie tickets are going on sale. I like to stay on top of it, and I discovered that Captain America Civil War tickets go on sale tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, noon Eastern Standard Time. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's maybe a little trailer or something to announce the tickets have gone on sale. So stay tuned for that. I think tomorrow might be a big day indeed. Or maybe the tickets will just go on sale. We'll see. But I think that's unlikely. I think they would want a lot of pomp and circumstance for such an event. But anyway, today is a light day, but there are still some very interesting things for us to discuss. The first is, once again, Disney. Yesterday was an all-Disney episode, and they're continuing to make headlines. And Bob Iger was talking about Star Wars spin-offs. He talked about Star Wars Rogue One, but then he also mentioned the Han Solo movie, Young Han Solo. And that's really how we've been referring to it because, of course, there have been so many stories about casting young Han Solo, with the rumor that he might show up in Star Wars Rogue One, which is why they were working so hard to cast it now, even though the movie is a ways off. But what's interesting about what Bob Iger, I got distracted for a moment because, when you think about it, Rogue One is supposed to take place right before A New Hope. So you'd basically be casting someone to play Han Solo at the exact same time that Harrison Ford basically started playing the character in, the timeline of the Star Wars movies. So, when you think young Han Solo, you think even younger than when Harrison Ford originated the character, to justify the movie. But to think that someone's playing Han Solo circa when Harrison Ford started playing the character just gets even weirder and a little more sacrilegious. But if it's Taron Egerton, I think we'll all be okay. I also think Ansel Elgort is an excellent choice. But anyway, Bob Iger, back to the story. Bob Iger was talking about this, and he said, it's going to be an origin story for Han Solo and Chewbacca. And I think that's a really cool idea. I think that many of us would wonder, how did Chewbacca and Han Solo meet? How did they become partners in crime, partners in life? Petty crime, I'm sure Han Solo would say. But actually, when Star Wars The Force Awakens came out, and this is a spoiler, but if you haven't seen Star Wars The Force Awakens at this point, that's your choice. So go on the internet at your own peril. But somebody made a webcomic after the movie came out, showing, obviously Kylo Ren kills his father, Han Solo, and Chewbacca fires a blaster shot at him afterwards, wounding Kylo Ren, like a torso shot for his fight later with Rey and Finn. But anyway, someone made a webcomic about Chewbacca, playing with a young Ben Solo, getting to know him, and then flash forward to when that horrific moment. We'll see how bad that is for the franchise, or if the franchise can get over that. I think they can get over it, but I'll still always be upset about it. But I wish that the movie had this kind of feels, because they had Chewbacca, put Kylo Ren in his sights with his weapon for a headshot, and then remember knowing this person is a child, and the bond that they had, and deciding to instead to go for a wound. And I thought that was incredibly emotional and telling, that even though he just killed Han Solo, Chewbacca couldn't totally just diverge himself, or divest, I'm searching for the right vocabulary word, from his history with Ben Solo. And I thought that was really great. So I would love to see, that explored more, the Chewbacca-Han Solo relationship, how it came to be. What is their life like when they're not piloting the Millennium Falcon? I think Chewbacca will be a difficult character to have in there for a long period of time, because he obviously does not speak. And I'd be curious as to how Han Solo can understand him, right? If they'll go into that as well. But I think that's a very good story, and I think that makes me a little bit more excited for the young Han Solo movie, or as we can now call it, the Han Solo Chewbacca origin story. That sounds much better. All right, so that's the first story of the day, and I'm curious if you think that sounds better. What do you think of an actor playing Han Solo, circa Harrison Ford originating the character? And then also, what do you think of that depth of that webcomic? That webcomic had more depth than the actual J.J. Abrams film. All right, so anyway, that's the first story of the day. The second story of the day is this really cool poster that came out for X-Men Apocalypse. We were just talking about the Civil War posters and how I felt they were like the worst trading cards ever. I was like, oh, why would anybody want to collect those? And now, sure enough, as many of you tweeted me, here comes a cool poster, a villains poster for X-Men Apocalypse, which looks just like a trading card. And I have to say, I do like it quite a bit. There's something about it that bothers me we'll get to in just a moment, but I just wanted to talk about how I think that, conceptually and working with what they do have, this is a very nice poster. I love the use of powers. I love that Michael Fassbender is always front and center. I'm sure Oscar Isaac is like, aren't I the main villain of this movie? And like, everybody likes Michael Fassbender. Magneto has become such a, big part of this franchise. Deservedly so, both from the work of Ian McKellen and Michael Fassbender. But I think that Storm's eyes with the lightning look so cool. It's like, why didn't you do that sooner? Right? And then I appreciate Giant Apocalypse with the big size because he's supposed to be that big. I like Archangel, of course, in the background. That's very important. We'll get to that in a moment. And then also Psylocke with the her Psyblade. I think that, I like the longer Psyblade that she has in the trailer that's entwined around her arm. That's really cool. But that looks neat as well. So it's a great poster. But I think that one of the things that it highlights is that this isn't a particularly scary group of villains. And when I look at this poster, I'm not like, oh, the villains, right? You're kind of like, oh, yeah, that's like one of the teams at X-Men Apocalypse. And we have a lot of teams of heroes fighting each other this year. We've got Batman v Superman. We have Captain America Civil War. Now we have the X-Men fighting each other. Some of them being manipulated by Apocalypse. But still, at the end of the day, it's the exact same story. So I really wish they had gone with the original setup where they had new mutants that were, new to the storyline, basically, with the exception of Archangel being these horsemen. Caliban was a horseman, a Morlock, and he's actually going to be in the movie, but he's not a horseman here for some reason. And I just, Archangel was the one turned X-Man and mutant that the readers were familiar with when they introduced the character of Apocalypse and his horsemen. And it was a very powerful story. And I almost wish they had taken an X-Man that everybody was familiar with, like Wolverine, right? Because they haven't established Archangel yet, and turned him. I think that would have been a much more emotional story, and also if he was the lone hero fighting with the villains. Here you have a bunch of heroes fighting with the villain. So everybody, I think it dilutes the power of turning them, right? You're like, oh, he turned like a whole bunch of people. Whatever. We know we're going to free him by the end of the movie. So I really would, and also I think they've gone with different mutants. They could have made them scarier, more grotesque, like the Horsemen are supposed to look. And also Archangel, to be fair, he's missing the blue skin. I mean, his change was supposed to be truly horrific. I mean, the Marauders ripped his wings off or damaged them beyond repair and impaled him on the side of the wall in an homage to, a Christ figure. So I think that I'm surprised that if you're going to do the X-Men Apocalypse story, you would rid it of all of its emotional punch and just kind of do a very surfacey adaptation. So we'll see how the actual execution is. But when I look at this poster, I not only like what I see, but I'm saddened by what I don't see and what I could have seen. So I'm curious, what do you think? I mean, it's a great poster. The characters look awesome. But I'm curious as to what you think about how they so far seem to have adapted this story, and what do you think of the team being made up of so many heroes? All right, so the third story of the day is a fascinating story from the Wall Street Journal. Now, we've talked before about China being up to some shenanigans when it comes to movie ticket sales. For instance, they wanted, one of their movies, a film made in China, to do better at the box office than a U.S. release. So people were saying, moviegoers were saying, hey, when I buy a ticket for an American film, they print me out a ticket for a local movie, and then they just write on it with pencil what theater I'm actually supposed to go to. So that was like pretty bad. But now there's an even bigger story that's broken. And they're having a real problem, and some Chinese regulators are getting involved, although I think one has to wonder what kind of regulation do they have in China. But anyway, this is what's happening. So it's been revealed that Chinese distribution companies, in order to have good headlines, we always talk about how important a big box office headline is. X movie opens with close to $100 million, and of course it makes everybody else be like, maybe I should go and see that. Well, it turns out that, to make sure they get those kind of headlines, distribution companies in China are working with theaters to sell out ghost screenings. For instance, they said for Ip Man 3, they had several screenings every 10 minutes after midnight that were all selling out, but they were supposed to be playing supposedly in the same theater. Now, Chinese journalists have uncovered this, which I think is interesting because I saw a story like a week ago where it said that the Chinese government was telling journalists to stop, pushing China towards a more democratic, capitalistic society. Because, they have such a large middle class there, or such a growing middle class, that I think it's going to become harder for them to, maintain their communist stronghold on the country and the minds of their people. So what's going on over there is fascinating. I think they have a real conflict of interest in the Chinese government. They want all this business and commerce, but that is flies directly in the face of the communist country that, they had on lockdown. But anyway, so that's one problem, and that they're inflating box office. Well, they're not. They're genuinely purchasing the tickets, so the money is going into the box office. But it's not people buying those tickets. It's the companies that are, they're saying investing a couple $1 million, sometimes as much as $10 million into the opening weekend. And they're saying they resell those on discount sites, and that's how they recoup some of their expense. But still, that's insane. The other problem they've discovered is that a lot of theaters, particularly outside of the big cities in China, are underreporting their box office revenue. Why? Well, not only do they not want to pay taxes on it to the government, but they don't want to have to give a larger share of the money to the studios, including U.S. studios. So you have a situation where they're underreporting how much a movie grosses so they can pocket that money and pay less taxes. So there's a real problem going on over there. And at the same time, because China is so aggressive in making sure they put their local films front and center and limiting the number of foreign films that can come into the country and how long they can play, the foreign market share is also shrinking, and Chinese films are taking up more of the box office revenue. So while there's so much money in China at the box office, which is changing the way movies are made and who's in movies, now we're getting a situation where maybe there might be a lot of money in China, but not for anybody outside of China when it comes to movies. So that's a really fascinating dilemma, and we should keep an eye on this to see how it develops. All right, so that's the third story of the day. And I would like to say, I know that the internet is censored in China, but there are a number of Hong Kong BTT viewers, and when I hear stories like this, I can't help but be very sympathetic to you guys because, of course, you've recently just become a part of China again, and I know that you have to deal with this, and you really are going from, an open capitalistic society to back to this communist government. So I'm curious as to what it's like for you with that change and, affecting your day-to-day life activities like going to the movies. All right, so now on to the viewer question, which comes from Yaxi Guerra, who had a question, about some of the coverage I've been doing. I talked about Nina Simone earlier this week and dark-skinned, talent versus light-skinned talent, and how, light-skinned talent is favored much more so by the Hollywood machine. So Yaxi Guerra says, "Hello, Grace. On this episode, you mentioned that Disney is one of the big studios in Hollywood, and my question is, do you think that a minority group of actors, i.e. dark-skinned actors, need to start their own studio to have different and more varied characters in movies? And if this could happen, what do they need besides money to do it?" I'm aware that it is a sad question to think about because it's not fair to get at this point, but I hope you consider to answer it at some episode. Smiley face. Yes, Yaxi, great question. I don't know if they have to go so far as to start their own studio, but they should. I think that Will Packer does a wonderful job of producing a lot of films that feature black talent. Very successful as well. And whenever there's money involved, Hollywood wants to get involved. Look at the success of Tyler Perry, or at least the success they had for a while on the big screen. He's largely moved to a television business model. But anyway, if you can prove that they will come, Hollywood will distribute your movie. So I wouldn't say they need to start their own studio, but I think that perhaps talent that isn't getting work needs to make their own movies, right? Like, for instance, Vince Vaughn and Jon Favreau couldn't get any work, and they made Swingers. And then, of course, they got a lot of work. And, Hollywood history is full of talent that wrote themselves into the business. Another example is Ben Stiller, who made himself, a star. Now, also, I think a really good recent example is Nate Parker with Birth of a Nation. I think that film is potentially very inflammatory, but he's doing very, very well. He just signed with CAA. And he's an example of black talent who could not get any work and made work for himself. So I think that talent that can't get work, and this is for any talent, not just black talent. This is just for the diversity conversation overall. If you can't get work in Hollywood, you need to show Hollywood how you can be utilized and that people will respond to you as a talent. So you need to produce a film, you need to direct the movie, you need to write it. And also I think that you need to make something that is commercially competitive. Now you want to make sure you get the good reviews. You can go super critical like Nate Parker has done with Birth of a Nation, which I think is going to be obviously a huge awards contender and potentially a box office juggernaut because of the subject matter and how angry the movie is. I could really tap into something. We'll see what the situation is like socially in the United States in a couple of months when the movie's released during this upcoming award season. It's a couple of months away at this point. But still, you have to make sure your movie is commercially viable and that people will want to see it and become a fan of yours. I think that a couple of movies that have come out as of late, tend to be a little bit too niche and they never really find an audience. So it's hard to get yourself up to the next level. So I think that you need to be not only a good business person and to make movies, but you need to be really savvy about the type of movie you're making and what your goal with that movie is. So again, I don't think they need to have a studio, Yaxie, but I do think that any talent that feels they're not getting work needs to be more proactive and follow the example of many other of lots of talent, white talent that has created roles for themselves and places for themselves in the industry. So I think that applies even for someone who is not in a part of a group that isn't being recognized. If you just personally can't get work, for instance, Mindy Kaling wrote herself, that play Ben and Matt, and that's how she got successful. And Ben Affleck and Matt Damon wrote themselves into Hollywood with Good Will Hunting. So there are plenty of examples of how that can be done, and I just think it's nice if Hollywood can make you a star, but sometimes you got to do it yourself. All right, thank you for your question, Yaxie. I hope that was helpful. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and that viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.